what we're starting off this semester with is factoring. Now, we've done factoring before. We've done this before. We did it in our chapter with solving quadratic functions by factoring and using that there. The reason we're going to go over it again is because the next chapter we're covering is going to be over rational functions, rational equations. And a rational equation, well, rational, means that we're dealing with a fraction. And we can have variables in the numerator and denominator. We can have variables in the numerator and denominator. And for us to be able to solve these, we need to make sure that there are no common factors in the numerator and denominator. And whenever we're dealing with quadratics or these higher degree polynomials, we need to be able to factor them to be able to see if there is a greatest common factor on top and bottom. Because if, for the denominator, x plus, let's see here, it would be 4 and 4, nope, this would not factor, does not look like. But if it did, then we could see if there's a greatest common factor on top and bottom. That could cancel or simplify out. So before we delve into these here, I want to go over factoring one more time just to make sure that we remember it and it's fresh in our minds. Now we're going to go over factoring today, tomorrow, and then Thursday, Friday will be one whole lesson. And then we'll test over this next week. Now, when we cover factoring, we had a few steps. And the first main step that we had was to determine if there is a greatest common factor. Greatest common factor. If there is a number or variable or term that we can factor out of all three or everything in the expression. And when we look at this here, b squared plus 12b plus 20, well, there's not a greatest common factor. There's not a term that is in common with all three terms in this expression. b squared, 12b, and 20, there's not one that's in common with all three. So we don't have a greatest common factor. Now our second step when we did this was to have two sets of parentheses with three spaces. Two sets of parentheses with three spaces. 1, 2, 3. And this is really setting us up for factoring, for where we can plug our terms in. With steps 1 and 2. Now, step 3 was to find the signs. Now, if the third term is positive, then the signs are the same, and match the sign of the middle term. And if the third term is negative, then the signs are opposite. So if the sign of the third term is positive, the signs are the same and they match the sign of the middle term. If the sign of the third term is negative, then the signs are opposite. So when we look at this here, what is the sign of the third term? It is positive. So that means the signs are the same and they match the sign of the middle term. And what's the sign of the middle term? Positive. So it means the signs for this here are both going to be positive. They're going to be the same and they're both going to be positive. Any questions on this here so far? Our fourth step is to find the factors of the first and third term. Find the factors of the first and third term. So when we look at this here, the first term is b squared. Well, the factors of b squared would be what and what? B and b. And we can go on and plug those in because there are no other factors for b squared. There are no other two things that multiply together to give us b squared. B times b is the only things that multiply together to give us b squared. Now the other one we're looking at is the factors of 20. We're looking for what multiplies together to give me 20. Well, we have 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 3 doesn't work, but 4 and 5. Because these are all the factors of 20, the numbers that multiply together to give me 20. Now we need to pick one of these sets of factors to try first. 2 and 10. We can go on and plug those in. Because our last step in factoring is just to check it to make sure that it does work. And when we check it, the main ones that we're going to check are b times 10 and 2 times b. We're not going to focus on b times b, our first term times our first term, because b times b is b squared. Well, where did we get b and b from? We got it from b squared, so they will multiply together, back together to give us b squared. And 2 times 10 should multiply together to give us 20, because those are the factors of 20. B and b are the factors of b squared, and 2 and 10 are the factors of 20. So those should multiply together. The main one that could be changing and will be changing depending on the factors is really the 12b, and that's the one we want to make sure we did get in this setup. So we multiply these together to check. Well, we do b times 10, which is 10b. 2 times b is going to be plus 2b. And 10b plus 2b is 12b. And is positive 12b the middle term that we wanted? Yes. So that tells us that these two here are the factors of this polynomial expression, b squared plus 12b plus 20. And that's it. Any other questions on this here? Now, hopefully as we work through these, it'll come back to doing these last semester when we did this before. We were ready for the next one. All right, let's look at this one here. A squared plus 4a minus 32. Now again, the first thing that we want to look at when factoring is to see, is there a greatest common factor between these three terms? Well, is there one? Well, no. Because there's not something that we'll go into to a squared 4a and 32. There's not something in common in all three terms, so there's not a greatest common factor, which means we can move on to the next step. Two sets of parentheses with three spaces. So now that we have this set up, that takes care of steps 1 and 2. We can look at step number 3, which is finding the signs. And when we find the sign, we're looking at the third term. And here the third term is negative, so the signs are opposite. One is going to be positive and one is going to be negative. Now where we put the positive and negative really doesn't matter. We just need to put one in one place and one in the other, because once we get everything plugged in, we're going to check it. And if it doesn't give us the correct middle term, we can change it and rearrange it. Any questions on this so far? All right, that brings us to step number 4, finding the factors of the first and third term. Now the factors of a squared are a and a. Since there's only one set of factors, we can just plug it in. Now the factors of 32, well, we'll have 1 and 32, 2 and 16, and 4 and 8. 3 doesn't work because the sum of the digits of 32 is 5. 3 plus u is 5. And 5 is not divisible by 3, because our divisibility of 3 property states that a number is divisible by 3 if the sum of its digits is divisible by 3. 5 doesn't work because the 1's digit has to end in a 0 or a 5. 6 doesn't work because a number has to be also has to be divisible by both 2 and 3. And that really is it. Now looking at these 3 sets of factors, which one do we want to try first? 4 and 8. Does it matter which one we put first? I'll just go on and put 4 first. And lastly, we need to check it. We need to multiply. And we'll have to switch the signs. Now we don't have to worry about a times a, because a times a is a squared. That's where we got a and a. We also don't have to worry about 4 times negative 8, because 4 times negative 8 will give us back to negative 32. That's where we got 4 and 8. Now if we check the other ones, a times negative 8 is negative 8a. 4 times a is plus 4a. And negative 8a plus 4a is negative 4a. Is that the middle term that we wanted? No. Is it the correct number, though? Yeah, it is the correct number, but wrong sign. Now, whenever we have this here where we get the correct number but wrong sign, what we can do is we can flip the signs. Since the first one was positive, we can make it negative, and since the second one was negative, we can make it positive. We flip it. We flip the signs. And if we check it again, let's try that one. Oh, let me write. A times 8 will be 8a. Negative 4 times a would be negative 4a. And 8a minus 4a is a positive 4a, which was exactly what we wanted. So we get this here. And that's it. That's all we have to do for this here. Any questions on any of this here? If not, we can go on and look at the next one here. Number 7, x squared minus 17x plus 72. Now, when we look at this here, is there a greatest common factor between these three terms? Well, no. And kind of the giveaway is that there's not a number in front of x squared, and 72 doesn't have a variable, because those two would need to have something in common, as well as the middle term. But since x squared and 72 don't have anything in common, well, it doesn't matter if the middle term has something in common with the first or third term. The greatest common factor has to be across all three. So we can move on to the second step. Our two sets of parentheses with three spaces. So that takes care of the first and second step. Now our third step is to find the sign. So when we're trying to find the sign, we're looking at the third term. Now here, the third term is positive. And if the third term is positive, the signs are the same and they match the sign of the middle term, which is negative. So both signs would be negative, minus and minus. So that takes care of steps 1 through 3. Step number 4 is to find the factors of the first and third term. Now the factors of the first term would be x and x, if it'll let me write. Now we need to find the factors of 72. Now with some of the bigger numbers, it might be helpful to go on and write them out, because we will have 1 and 72. We'll also have 2 and 36, 3 and 24, 4, I don't think will work. No, 4 and 18. 5 will not work because it's ends in a 2. 6 will work because both 2 and 3 work. It would be 12. 7 doesn't, but 8 does. It'd be 8 times 9. And we can stop there because the next number after 8 would be, well, 9, and we already have it listed as a factor. Any questions on how we found the factors of 72? All right. Which set of factors do we want to try first? 8 and 9? Why would you pick 8 and 9 over, say, 1 and 72? That and 72 is way too big, isn't it? Well, also, when the signs are the same, really we're adding those numbers together. It's going to get bigger one way or the other. There's not a chance that the numbers will combine and get smaller. So most likely, these 4 here, where one of the terms is bigger than the middle term, bigger than 17, probably aren't going to work. And if we check this here, if it'll let me write, x times negative 9 would be negative 9x. Negative 8 times x is negative 8x. And negative 9x minus 8x is negative 17x. Is that the middle term that we wanted? Well, yes. So these here are our factors. Any questions over any of this here? How do we feel about this here? Most of it coming back from last semester? Okay. If we feel comfortable with this here, we'll go on and skip to number 8. So bottom of the next page. Because this one here is a little bit different. Not a whole lot, just a little bit. What is the main difference between this problem and the ones we did before? There is a number in front of r squared, and also, do we have a greatest common factor? 2. So here, this is the first problem that we actually do have a greatest common factor of 2 that we can actually pull out. We can factor it out. And when we factor the 2 out, really we're dividing each term by 2. Well, our 2r squared divided by 2 will leave us with r squared. Our 6r divided by 2 will be plus 3r. There we go. Minus 4. Because our 6 divided by 2 would give us 3. Our 8 divided by 2 would give us 4. Now, since we're factoring out a positive number, the signs aren't changing. Now, we could factor out a negative if we wanted to. It wouldn't do us any good here. But it is possible, and the signs would change if we did that. Are there any other greatest common factors? Well, no. So that means we can move on to step number 2, which is rewriting this with 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Now, are the 3 spaces completely mandatory that you have to write them in? Well, no. I do the 3 spaces a lot of the times up here as a way to give myself enough room when I do the parentheses, so that I'm not writing the parentheses way too close together and then having to erase and space things back out. It gives me a good way to actually give myself enough room. When I fill the numbers and all the information in, it'll all fit. So if you do feel comfortable without writing the 3 spaces, that's fine. You don't have to put those in. Now the next part is finding the sign. Well, our third term is negative, so the signs are opposite. When the third term is negative, the signs are opposite. When the third term is positive, the signs are the same and they match the sign of the middle term. Okay. Now we need to find the factors of the first and third term. So what are the factors of the first term? R and R, well, we got a good bit of that the last 2 weeks, hopefully. R and R, rest and relaxation. It's okay, you don't have to laugh. They're not funny. And then we need to find the factors of 4. So the factors of 4 would be 1 and 4, 2 and 2. Which one of these do we want to try first? 1 and 4. Which one would we put first? Why did we say 4 would be positive? 4 minus 1 is 3. The middle term is positive, so we probably want the bigger term to be positive. And just to make sure we can check it, if it'll let me write instead of selecting. Our r times negative 1 would be negative r. Our 4 times r would be plus 4r. And negative r plus 4r is positive 3r. Is positive 3r what we wanted for the middle term? It is, because at this point we're not referring back to the positive 6r. We're looking back at the 3r, because we're looking at it after we factored the 2 out. So this entire statement here, this entire expression would be the correct answer. We do need to make sure that we do have the greatest common factor included because it is part of the answer. Any questions on this here? Do we kind of feel comfortable with that there, factoring out the greatest common factor and moving from there? Because this one here, number 9 and number 12 really don't add anything. They're the exact same thing. Should we feel comfortable with these two here? All right. Let's look at this one here, and this one here is actually the last one we're going to look at today. What makes this one different than the ones we've done so far? Squares in the middle, yes. It's not in standard form, because standard form always goes in decreasing powers and in alphabetical order. So really this should be x squared plus 3x minus 10. Because we should really rearrange it in this order here. And then we can go through the exact same steps that we did before. So we would have two sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Last hour it was erasing instead of selecting. Now we can look at the signs. Well, the third term is negative, so our signs would be opposite. One would be positive and one would be negative. Now the factors of x squared are x and x. And the factors of 10. Because we'd have 1 and 10 and 2 and 5, and I'm assuming y'all are picking 2 and 5. And we could say 5 would go first because the middle term is positive, so most likely we would want the bigger number to be positive. And last but not least, we can check it. Well, come on. There we go. X times negative 2 would be negative 2x. 5 times x would be plus 5x, and negative 2x plus 5x is positive 3x. Is that the middle term that we wanted? Yes. So these here would be the factors. And again, working with the bigger number with the positive sign, because if it's positive, the bigger number would most likely be positive, does work even if we do have a number in front of x, if it'll let me circle there. Because then we can just really look at the multiplication, which one will most likely be bigger. We can work with it that way also. But that's all we're going to do for this here. Now, I don't know why I included the other ones in here. But that is it. That's all we're going to be doing for today. Now, for this entire week, for all of the chapter that we're going to cover factoring with again, is going to be all on worksheets. So you won't be having to use the book for this part here. Now, Google Classroom, I am in the process of getting it squared away again. We won't have a new Google Classroom for this semester. It's going to be the exact same one as the one we had for last semester. I am just in the process of rearranging all the stuff in there because I'm going to move all the assignments from last semester into under a topic of fall 2020 or fall 21. They're just going to be all moved down there. So you don't have to worry about them. They're not in any particular order. You won't have to worry about those. Those will just be moved. And all the new assignments will be week 1, week 2 under the same headings as last semester.